Hello, and welcome to what is probably the most important session of the day on 6G security. So I'm delighted to be present with some world experts here on our panel, and we're going to talk about whether 6G can and will it be built with security by design in mind. Our abstract says that no generation of network technology has been architected around the need for secure, trustworthy computing. I would also argue that people have tried in different areas, but yes, successfully we have not done it. We're going to talk for 45 minutes or so about some of the challenges that we face and whether that is actually possible. And I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. But first of all, my name is David Rogers. I own a company called Copperhorse, and I'm chair of the Fraud and Security Group at the GSMA, amongst other things. And I'm going to be moderating the panel today. From my screen, first of all, Jaya Balu, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, my name is Jaya, and I used to be the Chief Information Security Officer at KPN Telecom in the Netherlands, and I'm currently the Chief Information Security Officer over at Avast.
Thank you. And Greg Young from Trend Micro.
Hi, Greg Young here. 33 years cybersecurity, former CISO, Federal Department of Communications, 14 years at Gartner, and 3 years head of cybersecurity for Trend Micro.
Thank you. And last but not least, Bob Everson from Cisco.
Yeah, thanks, David. And thanks, everybody, for joining. My name is Bob Everson. I'm Senior Director for 5G Architecture at Cisco, coming at this from a little bit different angle on more of the mobility side. And I'm basically here to decide when I need to change my title to 6G instead of 5G. Kidding aside, I'm looking forward to a good discussion.
Great. Okay. Well, let's get started. And clearly, you know, I'm just about to go on to a 5G security session tomorrow, and about all the work we're doing on GSMA in ensuring that 5G is operationally secure. Because actually, we haven't rolled out some of the 5G networks yet, but here we are talking about 6G. And you know, is it realistic that we can design 6G with security in mind? Are we far enough down the road in terms of our understanding about what we mean by secure by design when it comes to thinking about that next generation? So I'm looking at Bob first.
yeah. So maybe I'll lead off here and then let the others jump in. You know, I think it's an important goal. You know, the way I think about this is a couple of things. Number one, mobile networks have benefited from not really being the most attractive target. You know, it's sort of a security by obscurity. But that's not really a great strategy. You know, as we move into 5G, as you said, we're really just getting started with 5G. And then as we move into 6G, they become much more attractive targets. And I think, you know, things like Colonial Pipeline and others are showing that infrastructure is much more of an attractive target. So I think it's good. I think we're going to have to break the problem down into segments. You know, look at things like the air interface security, platform security, application security, and sort of attack them in many different ways. And then I think the last point that I'll make, just sort of framing this up initially, is you know, security by design. It starts now with 5G, because again, we're very early in 5G, and 5G is unique for operators as opposed to really the prior generations, because there is a significant architectural inflection point that's happening right now, where they're moving to more software-based architectures, disaggregated systems, more open systems, and they're re-architecting that platform. So as they do that, it's essential that we're building in the right security capabilities now that are going to propel us into the 6G era.
Yeah, and from the sharp end, so obviously companies like Trend Micro and Avast, you're seeing what it's like on the ground. Do you see any evidence that security by design works or is changing at all?
Yeah, you know, I think looking historically, you know, we've always had infrastructure that has not been self-defending. It's always the target; it can't secure itself. And where we've had protocols that haven't had any security nexus at all, it's also ended very badly. So you really need both. You have to do security by design at the protocol level, and then for the infrastructure, and then the aftermarket deployment. It's going to be very different. Right now we have the benefit of a lot of the equipment being up on towers, nice and safe even from the physical aspect, and a lot of these things are changing. The actual whole infrastructure is going to be changing between now and when 6G starts to get rolled out. So we have to definitely accommodate it, because we know what will happen if we don't talk about security.
And you said about what do you see from the ground, and what you see is, of course, you mentioned Colonial Pipeline. Of course, we're seeing a ton of ransomware attacks, but what I think is equally worrying is the evolution of botnets, and the evolution of botnets being used for distributed denial of service attacks. And where we know from the telecom sector, we were concerned about like the Mirai botnet, which had an impact at the time on Deutsche Telekom. We're seeing like the Maris botnet, which is really trying to use IoT infrastructure, which is all going to be propelled by this kind of ecosystem to launch further future attacks. And if we don't build security by design, we're just going to wind up paying it forward and having to deal with it later. So this is just kind of homework. We need to do this if we want to launch anything new. And we're still like relying on protocols and underlying systems that are not built with security in mind. So we still need to make sure that we have some additional coverage, if you will, for those kinds of attacks that are still going to be coming.
And that's a great point. When you move on, when you think about the you mentioned botnets and IoT devices, part of what we're doing with 5G and 6G is we're moving to, IoT device used to be, some low-end device, right, with limited capabilities, still obviously vulnerable, but much more limited capabilities and limited bandwidth and an ability to do harm. We move into 5G and 6G, and critical devices become, IoT devices. And so, yeah, we need to be really designing that from the start and ensuring that we can provide a secure environment. I think the other piece that I just want to add on here as well too is, protocol layer, all of that's really important, but we need to be thinking about, one of the most, probably the most vulnerable places, or one of the highest risk places, is even before it gets into the network. We think about trusted supply chain, trusted execution environments, being able to establish that, at the silicon layer, at the hardware layer, at the software layer, and know where we're starting from to build on top of. And these are all things that are, we're in the process of trying to address and spending time on, but we're going to need quite a bit more work there.
I think we had to really deal with that in a sorry, I'm just jumping in here, David, but I think we had to deal with that in an incredibly difficult confrontational way when we were talking about 5G, because I mean, the entire kerfuffle around Huawei and Ericsson and Nokia and the whole shebang, where are we going to get our edge, devices from for that edge network, for that radio network? That became a huge contention point where governments got involved, and that doesn't necessarily improve things, as we all know. So I think it's really about how do we build like trusted mechanisms. It's really a processy thing, which I'm never very comfortable with, but trusted mechanisms and processes where we can actually have some sort of operational capability to continuously verify all of those partners that we need to play with in order to deliver any product.
And there's going to be a lot more partners, right? I mean, we're seeing that with 5G and sort of moving into the enterprise space, and where that 5G infrastructure is with private networks and so on. So, how, if we're talking about like tens of thousands of factories and businesses, how are we going to be able to establish that bilateral trust between, say, Cisco and a company in Germany that you've never heard of?
I think that opening up APIs are going to be a big part of it, and the APIs have to be, more than what we've had in the past. So, for example, we've had just security events being exported. That's not good enough. I think there's a two-way demand now that we need much more rich telemetry so we can consume it, to share it amongst, disparate equipment, disparate software, changing environments. But it also has to be the reverse, that we can take action when necessary. So if we have a very advanced SOC who's willing to look at the risks and say, we have an issue that one kind of equipment or one subset of an area isn't seeing, but we have to take action to be able to do that in a universal way with AI and ML assist, of course. And that sounds like a lot of very far future stuff, but it's really not.
Yeah, and Cisco, you mentioned Cisco, so I'll just dig in a little bit deeper in there. Our teams have been working a lot on trust assurance at the hardware layer. So to be able to establish trust and ensure that the hardware has not been tampered with as well. And so I think as technologies like that become more pervasive, and we see partnerships across the supply chain to be able to standardize as much as possible on that. That's a good start in this area.
Mm. So moving into the 6G era, I mean, we're talking about petabit core network speeds, terabit networks. How are we going to store all this stuff for analysis, and how are we going to process it quickly enough through AI and ML algorithms? Does anybody have the technology, or is anybody working on the technology to be able to do this? Because frankly, it doesn't seem to be working right now. And a lot of the AI, if you pull back the cover, it's the Scooby-Doo thing, right? Oh, look, it's an if-else nested set of statements, right?
Yeah, full packet capture, of course, is, it seems like the world right now, we're split between full packet capture or this cryptic sort of hieroglyphic that is almost meaningless for some of the security events. So in between, I think, is the real answer. We're not utilizing a lot of even the mid-sized data lakes now for security telemetry and information. So being able to pull that out, but you do some processing on it to say, well, what could be security relevant, or at least have access to indicators for some of the key parts. So you can shave it down, definitely. But we need much richer telemetry and kind of information than we're capturing today, especially because the bad guys know to move laterally, and they know where we don't have eyes today, and we're unlikely to have eyes in the near term.
I don't know if full packet capture is the way, though, because I mean, that's just basically copying your entire production network to have a separate network that only does analysis. And I think that that's ridiculous amounts of data and investment. And even the flow, because we try to find ways just to look at flow traffic, and flow traffic is also not that straightforward because it's so dependent on your sampling rate and your ability to process near real time. I mean, even that is quite problematic. So I can tell you, like, we take a look at different types of seams that already have machine learning built in, and then try to add our additional modules. And there's still a level of immaturity in the sense of we aren't fully equipped with our SOC team to know how to do everything we want to do. And at the same time, the product out of the box isn't supporting the feature set that we would necessarily need to dive in really deep in terms of understanding the math that's happening at a very low layer in order to construct the types of detections we would want. So, like, let's just say in a perfect world, we were able to have this production traffic go through one channel. We were able to pipe off a certain percentage of that, only the smart stuff. You don't want full PCAP because you don't want garbage polluting your seam, because you're going to have a log cluster that's ginormous. So you don't want that. So you only want to have the smart stuff exported over there. And then you want to be able to have intelligent detection, like with MITRE and with, all kinds of interesting IOC captures and feeds all hooked in to know what the hell is happening. We are so far away from that utopia.
Yeah, it's amazing what's sold, right? I mean, we know that obviously the sticks and taxi and all these different MITRE standards have come along, but it seems that we are a long way. And for me in the mobile industry, it feels like we're often quite disconnected from the corporate enterprise IT world, that never the twain shall meet. People in that world don't understand the nuances of signaling security or what type of data. And part of my mission is to try to connect those two sort of worlds together, but it is hard. And I would agree with you, Jaya, that this is quite immature right now. And even down to things like signaling firewalls, attackers can sidestep a lot of those if they even exist, because they're not stateful. So, when we get...
Let me ask you a better question. How many of the, rough percentage, just, really rough, how many of the global telecommunications carriers now have an SS7 signaling firewall?
I don't have that figure, but I agree with you that it's low. because I think this is another thing for us to debate here, is that obviously the world matures at different rates, and different countries are on different generations. People are different in terms of their cyber maturity as well. So we're lucky in the UK that the government takes it seriously, but other governments don't. And all of these networks have to interconnect. And all those companies have to work potentially globally. So how do we solve that? If only part of the world is on 6G, do we have to be backward compatible? We have to take the connections from somewhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that I think about even on the first question, as we're doing security by design on 6G, back to that and into what you're talking about here. It's not like generation by generation, it's a magical hard cut and everything before it is gone. I mean, 4G is actually still growing. You know, last estimates I saw was through 2023. 5G is not even going to overtake 4G maybe by the end of the decade when 6G is, you know, theoretically coming out. So, and we're still going to have 2G devices. There's a ton of low-end 2G devices. Probably, you know, they'll be in the network for who knows how long. So we really do have to not just count on this magical, okay, we'll fix it all in 6G, but we need to, you know, kind of keep improving now and figure out the characteristics of the different devices, of the different technologies and generations, because there are different things you can do by different generations, and be able to take a, you know, really comprehensive approach, which is kind of complex, but it's the way that we're going to be dealing with this for, you know, foreseeable future.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's always going to be more protocols. You know, 5G is just one of the components that's out there to be backwardly compatible with, but we've got to keep advancing and just try to get as much insight into 5G. I think one way is to get out of the silo. Just treat, you know, 5G as, you know, a lot of our network protocols have always been treated as this one silo, and security kind of stops and starts at the ends, and that's it. Everything in between, we've done our job. But I think even recognizing the posture of the handset or the turbine that's connected, even if it's a legacy 5G network at that time, and adding value to the 5G security with new models, especially when there's going to be a lot more device-to-device communication under 6G. So yeah, no, I think we can accommodate it. In fact, we can maybe even make 5G better through good 6G security.
Yeah.
Do we think that, so Bob and Greg, do we think that the network slicing paradigm is deliverable in 6G as well? Is it just an enhanced version of what we're going to see in standalone 5G?
Yeah, so I think slicing is an interesting technology and it will have use cases. I don't think we can really count on it solving the security problem. It does provide some level of isolation, but you have all the similar problems, you know, of you know, shared virtualization environments, you know, just Airlink vulnerabilities, you know, network vulnerabilities, all these things that need to be hardened. So I don't really, slicing's a funny topic. Again, I think it's got some, it'll have some important use cases, but it's been sort of postulated that it's going to be the solution for a lot of different things, and I'm hesitant to put too much trust into one technology like that. And I think slicing is another thing where, you know, again, just doesn't solve all the problems. I don't think we can count on it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think much like microsegmentation, that it's got a place, it has a use, but it's not the be all. And especially when there's, you know, a disappearing line between, you know, our software-defined networks and the applications they use and the users and the like, that I think we have to change the model between sort of putting things in buckets and hoping everything in that bucket stays the same sort of, you know, risk level, and instead start looking at risk level individually and just make our decisions based on that. So I think posture of devices, individuals, accounts, that's going to be much more useful in a 6G security model.
You know, one of the things that I just wanted to go back to, if I can, Greg, you know, you made the point around, you know, not dealing with the generations as silos. And it sort of triggered something in my mind that I think will help this. You know, right now, the mobile networks are largely closed. You know, they're sort of vertically integrated, vendor dependent systems. And there's a move now in 5G to move to more open systems, which means we get, you know, better documented interfaces and more ability to build security around it instead of kind of, you know, trusting in the black box. And I think that that's going to help us. I know that's going to help us harden the systems more holistically. It also kind of prevents us, or maybe not prevents, probably too strong of a word, but it helps us avoid the silos, because then, you know, you kind of end up with these standard interfaces, standard APIs that you need to secure and harden, but will work across, you know, multiple different generations. And the new generation essentially becomes a new software load and new Airlink maybe on the same system versus a distinct new system that we have to try and harden independently.
That's an interesting point, Bob. I mean, I've seen a lot of what I can only class as vendor lock-in, but using PKI and security as the excuse for that. But obviously with more openness comes more risk, right? That some bad actor's gonna be one of those third parties, or will cause a problem for an SME that's providing some capability to that network. And obviously people are looking at diversification, the benefits of diversification away from relying on 2 or 3 main suppliers in the world. But how can we manage that ecosystem? I mean, you know, if Google and Apple can't manage their app developers, do we think that we as a global industry can manage such an open network ecosystem like that?
Yes, I think you know, there's a couple ways I look at it. Number one, I think that there is a sort of fallacious thinking that people have that a closed system is inherently more secure. It's kind of like a quote that I've said before is, you know, just because the lights are off doesn't mean the cockroaches aren't there. You just don't actually see them. And so I think that you know, the systems are not inherently more secure, but on the other side, to your point, I mean, as you open it up and you're talking about it more, there's a potential for greater vulnerabilities. But I actually think that the industry coming together and being able to leverage, you know, not just in this case, you know, 3GPP centric security practices for the mobile network, but leverage cloud practices, leverage IP networking practices, and leverage the more IT security practices as well to help secure this system is where a lot of the benefits come in. But I'd love to hear from the other two as well from their angle.
So
Nope.
maybe no comment on that. But let's move on. Let's scare the audience a little bit more. So in about a year's time, NIST hopefully will have finished their competition, which is currently in round 3. I believe there are 7 finalists, and this is for post-quantum cryptographic public key algorithms. And this is because of mainly because of a particular academic paper from a guy called Shaw. And this is really about the risk from quantum computing and the power and the ability to factorize primes. So we do have one person here who is an expert on this, and that's Jaya. Jaya,
Yes.
just take us through this whole situation, because it's quite complicated, right?
Maybe I should explain. So at KPN, we already started experimenting with some of these algorithms, just trying to figure out, okay, what's the initial implementation? How do we play? And I'm the vice chair of the European Quantum Flagship, which is a €1 billion program to do all things quantum, from computing to communication, to sensing and metrology and simulation. And the clue with communication is it's trying to think about what does the next generation of the internet look like when it has a communication transport layer that's inherently secure based on post-quantum cryptographic algorithms, as well as entanglement in the physical layers of that communication. So really like the cables that are delivering the comms. The point of Shor's algorithm is that Shor's algorithm is basically a capability to factor or reverse some of the difficult mathematical problems that are the basis of our current cryptography. So all of our current crypto is based on 2 difficult problems: discrete logs and factorization. And if we figure out how to do those things, which a quantum computer can, then we've basically inherently rendered a lot of our current algorithms that we use, like RSA, all over the internet, we've kind of broken them. So this kind of looks for solutions of how to fix it. And this is something that we need to start playing with now, because even when there isn't an initial deployment, also that stuff will be potentially broken or buggy. So the name of the game there is just cryptographic agility. We need to kind of roll with it and do a better job of swapping algorithms than we've done since we've like implemented A51. We need to kind of get on the ball and roll it quicker.
Good. Okay. So, and just to make people a little bit less scared, because I was looking at some figures yesterday and I saw 8.8 billion SIM connections expected by 2025. So expect a device to be connected to those, and then probably lots and lots of other devices that don't have SIMs in. And I think 25 billion IoT devices, but pick a number, it's going to be very high.
Mhm.
So a lot of those are going to be not upgradable because of the hardware, and also symmetric key-based algorithms are vulnerable too. We just have to increase the key length. Is that right, Jay?
Yes, well, let's not put all symmetric algorithms there because there's still a key distribution problem.
Yeah.
So yes, like if you take elliptic curve, where there's still a risk, but if you look at whatchamacallit, my brain is fogging, but if you look at the AES, for example, AES, and if you use 256-bit keys, then you're still probably good to go for a little while longer.
So we're going to have to tackle this problem within the 6G era. There's no way out of that, right? And there have been a bunch of people working on this at ETSI and in NIST. So I mentioned the competition, and their sort of draft standard is due to be ready in 2022 and 2023. So for you guys as the industry, what's the next steps? And certainly, Jay, you're in a better position than anyone. And we'll come back to quantum key distribution as well, but just on this post-quantum issue.
So first of all, I think we need to get kind of like a protocol and a standardization ready to go. And then I want to make sure that you guys understand that I don't think there's a quantum computer arriving within the next, half a decade. So it's really around a decade out before we need to get our ducks in a row.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna suggest. Is I'm obviously not as close to it as Jaya maybe, but understanding from our folks and from what I know, we're probably around the end of the decade, best case, before nation state actors sort of have access to this technology. And even then, we're not talking about it, ordering it online or going down to your local electronics store and buying it. So criminal actors getting their hands on quantum computers is probably still a little ways out, but we absolutely need to be looking at this and working to solve it and address it. I think it's potential. It's somewhat convenient, right? It coincides with 6G. I'm not sure that the two are entirely interrelated. But since we work on decade timelines in the mobile side, and the current belief right now is somewhere around the end of this decade we'll start to see this quantum technology, quantum computers start to appear more. But still, it's going to be quite constrained. So I think we have some time to work on solving these challenges.
Yeah, I think it's going to end up in 6G's lap, that having to bridge between the quantum safe and the quantum unsafe. So there's a lot of, I agree with some of the timelines, but I think much like 5G accommodation, that we're going to have quantum safe and quantum unsafe accommodation be part of it, especially since it's going to look much different. A lot of the enterprise networks today are going to have 6G within them, not certainly just at the edge. So I think a lot of the technology change we're seeing now around, for example, like ZTNA networks, where there's a very flexible software-defined kind of VPNs happening, that's going to be definitely happy to accommodate and maybe be saved by 6G.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess so. A lot of these are lattice-based algorithms, so more complicated for a quantum computer to solve. But ultimately, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Jay, what will happen, hopefully, if it's smooth, is that NIST recommend algorithms, and they're then adopted into crypto library suites, and then that's basically adopted into products almost naturally. Would that be correct?
Well, that would be lovely, but we should know from our past experiences that there's always going to be a danger of implementation weaknesses. There's still going to be side channel attacks possible. There's a host of things, all algorithms have a certain bake time necessary in order to make sure that they're as good as we think they are. And just because we can't break them now doesn't mean that there isn't just a sort of computational attack that doesn't even need a quantum computer a few years down the road. So again, crypto agility, assume that we need multiple layers of security. That's what we know in security, right? Defense in depth, and make sure we can swap out an algorithm or swap out hardware or flexibly change to a different architecture or a different VPN when we need to.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on maybe summarizing. All these things are about the implementation, right, and how they're implemented. And it's funny, whenever when 5G came out, everybody thought, okay, this is going to be the magic thing, and it's this magical technology that's going to solve all this. And I see some of that around 6G. Well, 6G is going to be magical, or quantum computers are going to be magical, or all these sorts of things. And the thing that we've learned over time is the more things change, the more they stay the same. And there's some fundamental truths. And one of which is really kind of what Jaya was just hitting on is, there's a lot of implementation details that are going to have to be ironed out. And many of those are similar to things we've been facing for years.
And please let us don't bake them in silicon. So.
But I mean, so I promise I come back to quantum key distribution, but also quantum cryptography, because people, conflate all these things together, don't they? And they're entirely different things, aren't they, Jay? But they are being looked at for adoption as well, right?
Yes, and like we really need to separate the two. So you have entanglement-based communication, which is not the same thing as QKD, and you still have these post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. So you really need to separate the PQC stuff, which is a highly algorithmic-based strategy, versus this entanglement-based comms area, or secondarily QKD. All different, all have different approaches and implementations. And I think here too, because you have like religious dissent between which thing should you use. And I'm not into the whole jihadi thing. So I think the smarter thing is to be really skeptical and try to look for hybrid advantage. See which places in the network are the most accommodating for an algorithmic approach, because it scales across, the fabric of the internet. Algorithms scale. Point-to-point communication links, or even point-to-multipoint communications link, less so. So if you don't back that stuff in hardware and ubiquity, it will not scale. So for those places, it might be perfect for MDQKD or some sort of entanglement-based, communication. That's fine. But that will happen at the physical layer, point-to-point, point-to-multipoint. That's fine. And then everything else, you need to look for an algorithmic solution.
Okay, well, let's complicate things a bit more. So at the moment, we're assuming that everybody's working together across nations and we all love each other. But obviously, as somebody just said, some things stay the same, right? Maybe with different people from time to time, but the truth is of the situation right now, and particularly in relation to supply chain, is that, and I was just thinking when you were saying about hardware, is we have some issues. We have some issues around diversity of supply, but also about different visions and who wants to work together. So we know, for example, ATIS set up a task force around 6G, and there's some stuff going on in Europe, and there's some stuff going on in China. So are we going to end up with one single 6G set of technologies that interoperates correctly across the world, or is it going to be really fragmented? What do you guys think?
Yeah, since there was a pause there, maybe I'll start off on this. I think so number one, 6G is not one technology. Much like 5G is not one technology, 6G is not one technology. There's a number of different protocols involved. There's a number of different frequency bands and UEs and all sorts of things that are going to actually require quite different approaches. So, the notion of one 6G standard, probably, maybe a set of 6G standards. I think we'll have some regionalization, but I think it's probably a little bit over dramatic, maybe, if you will, to say that we're going to have all these different standards. There's a lot of talk about that, about how we're going to have a complete forking of the standards, and there may be something different in other part of the world. The thing that's been proven here is generally the market works this out. There were proprietary communications protocols that were established in various different regions of the world. In a couple of cases, like there was a lot of investment in a few countries in those, and they're gone now. Because it just didn't, the market forces just made that too hard to maintain and irrelevant. And so I think as we move to 6G, obviously there's a lot of geopolitical issues that are being debated, but I think in general we end up with some standardization, and the differentiation is going to be more about closed versus open. And the desire to, in some cases, to continue to drive more of a closed, vertically integrated system versus an open system. And I think that's That's kind of where I see more of a separation potentially, and that could be dangerous for the industry if we don't have the right kind of APIs and ability to interconnect the systems at a minimum, and you can get the right data out, and you have different data structures and data models and APIs and all these things that kind of are packed around that. Those types of things are probably what I'm more concerned about than a complete new set of standards.
I think some of the lessons we've learned in the past sort of few generations of, the standards has been that security is too often left behind and is a to be determined. So I think that security definitely has to pull it ahead. I think security is in a position nowadays, given the what's going on in terms of the threat environment, the ransomware, as Jai mentioned, and everything else, that I think security can pull ahead and force itself to be accommodated rather than just left aside or waiting to be determined later, and still not hinder the functional elements of 6G deployment, that the security high level specifications can be there, the kinds of functions and interoperability that's required. And maybe it'll pull security a little further ahead, and maybe pull the standards ahead too. It's optimistic, but if we don't try, we'll know it'll be a blank slate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if the events of late and maybe the more high profile attacks and things that have happened serve to do anything, hopefully there'll be more proactive investment in security and kind of doing this right in the next generation.
Great. I'm going to pick up on some other questions from the audience who've been patiently listening to us waffle on. So first of all, we have a question from Alan Chachich. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name there wrong, Alan. With 40 years to solve the internet cybersecurity problem, and a bit more probably, given how badly we've done, what makes you think we can do a better job with exponentially increased attack surface, all the new connections, and increased complexity, hence vulnerability? Don't forget, the bad guys aren't sitting still either. Can we be confident a 6G environment will really be more secure? And what's the risk of less secure?
Yeah,
I think we've got
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay. Yeah, through the decades, a lot of the models that were used for security have been creaking under this kind of scale that the questioner mentioned, and they haven't worked well. So this is why the White House executive order mentioned things like zero trust, which is really comes down to saying, hey, let's not keep doing what we've been doing, and let's break the models a bit. So no, I agree that we just can't do more of the same. At best case, then we could just not do a worse job. But I think we have to do a much better job, and that takes new kinds of technologies, which we have, and we've got some really promising early things right now that I think can be definitely deployed in this environment. But the old way is not the way, definitely.
Yeah, Alan, I would agree with Greg as well. I think the way I look at it is, if we just assume it's going to be better, then it's most certainly not going to be better, and the risks will increase as we get higher speed connections, more devices out there. Obviously, the threat surface expands just by nature of that alone. So we have to take it proactively. But I think we've learned a lot over the last 40 years, as you say, in your question here, and it's up to us in the industry to implement that and do it right now.
I think we're very good at beating ourselves up. I mean, this whole domain. I mean, I hate the fact that cybersecurity is just lumped together when actually there's so many individual disciplines that it breaks into, that somehow that one person can know all of these different areas and all these different technologies. We've gone well beyond that point, but there have been some good wins. We've avoided some major bullets, nuclear bombs, whatever you want, yeah, so I would like to be a little bit more optimistic in
Hey, David, I'm not so sure about that. I just think that if there was ever an attack like that on any nation state, they would never go outside with it. They'd never say we came this close to a cyber, Bay of Pigs type, almost pressing buttons by accident type of situation. There would be no way in hell. That being said, I think that critical infrastructure is continuously being attacked of different states, and that the geopolitical nature of what we do these days in terms of state-sponsored attacks and attackers, and the lines blurring between state actors and cyber criminals, like Kim Jong is like the OG gangsta of ransomware, as we know, he netted like 2 billion, right? So I don't think we've been that successful. I'm far less optimistic than you are.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah, there's certainly a lot that we don't know about and that is not publicly known. I do think that security is one of them. I'm kind of in the middle here, right? Where David, I do think security is one of those things where you hear about when it's going really bad, and those tend to make the news. To Jaya's point, you also don't hear about when it almost went really bad and the risk there. So we're obscuring that. I think there's also been, I don't know, maybe I'd like to hear if anybody else has an opinion. It almost like there's been some sort of a détente between from the nation state actors where they know if they go too far, they're equally dependent on this infrastructure. And
well, that's
so
what I was just about to say, Bob, actually. So there's this concept that is in an academic book of, so not MAD, mutually assured destruction, but mutually economic assured destruction. So MEAD, which is what you're saying, right? Is that if a nation state did act in that way and destroy all the civilian infrastructure, that there would be clear consequences back on them because their infrastructure is just as bad, right?
This is why we have vulnerabilities equities programs. When you take a look at like when there's a 0 day that a state actor has, they try to assess to which extent are we impacted ourselves from the 0 day that we've just bought or created or whatever. And I think that equities program doesn't just hold to 0 days, but also when you launch offensive actions, potentially as a hackback thing for a previous attack, also there are equities. So I think that balancing of equities in cybersecurity is not new. I just think that we don't tend to discuss it as much, and therefore we don't always necessarily know the scale of impact.
Well, let's assume that we're not going to destroy each other for now, and that 6G is worth doing. So Arupchiyoti Buyan asks, other than the large increase in number of devices, what do you consider as the new attack surfaces in 6G compared to 5G? Can I introduce space into this conversation as well? What about the increasing use of sensing as well as use of sub-terahertz spectrum? Any other key changes that 6G will bring that are of concern? And we've only got 6 hours to discuss this. So I guess let's tackle the first one first. So about the new attack surfaces in 6G compared to 5G.
So I think, and Greg made the point earlier. I mean, at one point, right, all of this infrastructure was almost at the top of the tower. And so now, this is not necessarily 6G specific, but as we're moving forward, we've brought things down from, some of the most intelligent parts of the equipment. They're not at the top of the tower. They're not at the base of the tower, moving them into cloud environments. So as I said earlier, we can benefit from cloud security and IT security practices, but we also, it's out there, right? And it's out there in shared virtualization environments, whether it's in the public cloud or whether it's in a private telco cloud. And so I think we have to think about things like that. I think the new devices that are coming out as well, which I guess that was the first point in his question there. So the other one that comes to mind, I'll think about this a little bit. Maybe the others want to jump in, but the other one that comes to mind really is we're doing more network sharing as we move forward. Operators are doing more network sharing. Neutral host deployments where they're sharing infrastructure, they're sharing, and so then the sharing is expanded more. And so we have to protect, obviously from interference and any kind of attacks on that infrastructure. And that's just going to get to be more and more pervasive, I think, as we move forward into 6G.
Yeah, I think attack surface wise, the physical one is definitely one. We've almost been given the answers in the back of the test that we know it's going to be supply chain. Physical access, I'm really encouraged by the work that the automobile manufacturers are doing with connected car. They're taking this kind of attack very seriously, and there's a good sort of roadmap there for wireless connectivity to devices that may be in very hostile environments. And I think also the ability, or there's increasing link between nation states and bad actors. The only way to counter that is through greater cooperation between government and industry, and it can't be a one-way street. It's got to be a partnership. And I'd throw academia in there as well. That too often, again, we have our own silos that have worked against us, and we've got to try to bridge those. And sharing is not going to happen automatically between nations or companies and the like, and we've got to have infrastructure to do it. So yeah, the attack surface is definitely changing, and the speeds, right? Speeds and proliferation of devices, and whose hands they're going to be in. Some may be on your competitors, the floor of your competitor's building. So yeah.
Jay, any thoughts?
No, I think they've said it all. And the bottom line is it's all changing and it's all dynamic. And I think what we need to do is figure out how we get our evolution at the same speed as the attackers. We just need to be kind of in sync, and we're not.
Mhm.
So I'll come back to space in a second, but just to address this point about sensing, I was doing a talk this morning, and I gave the example of cheating with Zwift. So Zwift is the sort of cycle racing thing, and lo and behold, there's cheating in cycling. What a surprise! And so now it's gone digital. So what some of these people are doing, they're changing their weight. It's called weight doping, and they're also able to intercept data from the power sensors and the cadence sensors. They can change the gradient so it's flat just to win these online races. And that's, I would say, loosely esports, right? There's not really that much money at stake. So the stuff that's on the sensing periphery, if it's easy to subvert, what effects does that have as it goes further into the network, and how much do we rely on that? And how can we fix that problem?
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, sorry, the binary sort of good, bad has to go away, and we have to understand posture and risk better to say that, yes, if the device is kind of suspect or it's looking at us with side eye, that is great information alone, and it's going to be somewhere in the middle, and we can make risk decisions based on what kinds of traffic we're going to put through it. So I think instead of the good, bad, it has to go to more risk and posture.
Yeah, and I think it's more data, and there was a good discussion earlier about just the ability for data to be overwhelming, and what's the right data, and what do you need to do with it. We're going to continue to improve our analytics capability, our ability to process those data sources and identify anomalies and other things that are outstanding there. So, but they have to keep track, right? They have to keep up with each other, right? Our ability to process needs to start to catch up with the amount of data that's out there and the different variations of it.
The interesting thing there, by the way, was the community set up something called ZADA, which is the Zwift anti-doping agency, and they've changed the name to something like data analytics now. But it's kind of like a kind of punk buster for that sort of esports world, which is kind of interesting. So that's a community-based data analytics and verification. So it's kind of interesting that sort of stuff's emerging. There's a lot of innovation, by the way, in the esports scene. I race GT3s in esports, and it's just incredible what's coming along. And the network needs of that type of use case are certainly something that we'll see in 6G. So those sorts of use cases, like the holographic stuff and the mixed reality stuff, it does rely a lot on network resilience, and we haven't really talked about network resilience here, but how do we maintain that? Because clearly the needs are a lot more than they are now, even for, like I say, something like esports.
Yeah, for network resilience, it's a really broad topic. So just a couple of things that are maybe top of mind for me. We're past the days where you can have manual operators, maintaining the network and making the network resilient. And so, more automation is coming into that. That's obviously essential. We do see obviously the more ML and AI capabilities, coming into this. Of course, then that exposes us to potential data corruption that we have to be careful with and make sure that the data set for ML doesn't get corrupted there. But network resilience, there's another angle, I guess, that I think about it as well. I mean, obviously it's essential, and of course I'm going to say that personally and also as a representative of Cisco. But one of the challenges that we're seeing with network resilience as well is it's so cross-domain now. You used to be able to really think about, okay, I have my transport network, I have my routers, I have my radio network, I have the data center, I have IT, all these things, I mean, there's some interdependency, but you have sort of domain experts. And I think one of the challenges now is really being able to do that cross-domain, correlate and identify problems, get to root cause very quickly without, the old, getting 20 people on the phone and trying to figure out, whose responsibility it is with going through that. And so there's the good thing is that from a resilience and automation standpoint and the analytics and all of that, there are really some great improvements that have been made over the last 2 or 3 years, and there's a lot of good stuff that's being developed there. And so I think from an overall network standpoint, we should be in good shape here on resilience. But then you get into 6G and you get billions of devices out there and all of that, and then that just changes the scale again on us.
I want to talk about space stuff because it's cool, right? Well, I'll make it less cool by talking about it. So 6G brings with us this dream of space-based comms, but my question here is we've seen countries leapfrog generations, right? Laos, I think, and Iraq, I think, jumped from 2G to 4G. Some countries have been able to jump straight from fixed line infrastructure up to 3G. Does that allow countries to level up and countries to leapfrog, particularly in the developing world, where in a lot of those countries there's vast distances and not a lot of infrastructure at all? And what does that mean?
I'm going to just take a stab here because I am completely fascinated by everything One World and Starlink. And they're both designed to give low latency connections to places where there's no physical infrastructure. So forget leapfrogging. It's just you go from like minimal physical infrastructure to a small transceiver that can receive that satellite communications and also have an uplink back. And I think it's really fascinating, but for it to really be meaningful for the rest of the world and actually have a business case which self-perpetuates, I think we need to figure out how do we get this to interoperate. I mean, you still need a lot of physical connectivity to actually build these kinds of networks. So it's not there for everyone. I just think that it could be one of those solutions that's actually meaningful when we look at, at GSMA, we always talk about the SDGs, and we used to try to figure out how do we bring down that digital divide. And I think these are the kinds of solutions that would do that. If 6G and the space-based stuff, other than the cool factor, also offered that bridge in order to do this. I mean, back in the day, KPN used to have a Station 12, their own satellite provider. How many of the telcos do we know that used to be in the satellite business? We sold that to Inmarsat, just before the boom. But I would love it if the traditional telcos took this as an opportunity to be more competitive, and to see this as a distinguishing advantage because of the infrastructure they already possess, and to increase the case towards countries that don't have it.
Yeah, I think there's a large percentage of the world population that doesn't have what we take for granted, which is just basic internet access. So to Jaya's point, I think that's one of the most interesting opportunities for me right now around satellite and space communications. It'll certainly evolve past that, but we also have to remember that it doesn't solve all the problems either. You still need devices in people's hands. You still need ground stations for distribution in a town or in a village or whatever. And so there's still a lot that needs to go there, but I think it's a good way to fast forward some of the biggest challenges, which is, okay, there's no fiber. Installing towers, building towers, and deploying that is non-trivial, very costly, and labor intensive and time consuming and all of that. And so I think there's a lot of possibility there. And then, as that technology evolves, there are certainly more potential advanced use cases, but I'm certainly most excited about sort of the connecting the unconnected angle on that right now.
How do we protect those satellites? I mean, we know about ground-based capabilities, the lasers to blind satellites and radio techniques and so on. But there is talk of space-based weaponry and so on. It's pretty catastrophic if some of those satellites come down, right?
I think the space junk is a bigger problem than the, weaponry. To be very honest, the higher likelihood is that there's just crap up there from 1963 that's going to all the other stuff. But I think that this is a real question for people who are monitoring a lot of the, there's actually an entire group, I think it's actually at NASA, that looks at all of the space junk up there and tries to figure out at which altitudes and which trajectories they actually may have some impact on the current communications equipment. And there's still other stuff, right? There's still also natural processes like solar flares and all kinds of magnetic radiation that would also have an impact on this tech. So I think none of it is resilient inherently, but it's our job to make it better.
Yeah, whether it's space-based or other infrastructure, it has to be resilient. I think we've learned that in the last year, where even staff not being able to get into a building because the building owner says, sorry, we're closed because of COVID. Even the best technology we had in the world didn't fix that. So, the network is the application is the network. We've been really good with app optimization. We need to get better at network resilience or just overall resilience. Even if we secure the network, but the apps aren't safe in that infrastructure, or the people aren't available, then we need to look at it end-to-end more.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to the people who've asked questions. We're not going to design the core network and redesign it for you here. But yeah, we didn't really touch on those sorts of things. And my reason for doing that was because that's not decided yet. It's still in that sort of early phase. Somebody said to me the other day that 6G is all about really just pushing all the use cases that were in 5G that were never achieved, which is fairly cynical. But if we look at some of those use cases and we look maybe 15 years into the future, and we've only got a couple of minutes left, so I've got very dystopian views of the future, but maybe you have more positive views than me. So thinking about all these different ideas and technologies, things like digital twins, parallel implementations, increased use of aerial platforms as well. We didn't really touch on that on the infrastructure side, but all those connected industries. What does the world really look like in 15 years' time? And will we have done a successful job or not?
So I'll kick off and I'll be brief because I see we only have 2 minutes here, but I'm actually very much an optimist about the future. And I think that I'm optimistic about 6G and just where we go, because I think communications technology is the ultimate enabler and the ultimate flattener of the world. And the more that pervasive high-speed connectivity is available everywhere, I think we inherently figure out how to use it, and certainly there are bad uses for it, but there are a lot more good uses. And beyond that, I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of things that we need to do, and I'll be respectful to my colleagues here and let them get a word in before we get cut off.
Okay, so I'm just going to leap in again. Hey, I am an optimist too, and I genuinely want to have, international space stations and connectivity to Mars and asteroid mining and all the other wonderful things that are out there. But I do think we need to sort our crap out way better than we've done in the past. And there's nothing like a good crisis to do that. So maybe this is the perfect storm. And it's amazing what we can accomplish when no one cares who gets credit.
That's quite a positive tone, yeah. And finally, to Greg to wrap up for us.
Yeah, I'm a scarred pragmatist that, I think things are bad enough right now that we don't need to make the case for security, hopefully. And that should give us some space to, do better in security in this and try to break out of some old models. If you smell things are heading back the way they were, just a repeat of the old kinds of approaches for security in these protocols and these infrastructures, then it's not going to work. So new models, new ways are going to be the only way out of this.
Brilliant. And that's a good point to end on. So can I just thank all the panelists and to all the people in the audience who asked questions as well. Thank you for those. And good evening and good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.